Why would she dare attend in such a gown? Surely no one will notice her in the shadows. The carriage wheels clattered along the rain-slicked cobblestones of London, each echo a whisper of judgment before she even reached the gilded doors of the Mayfair ballroom. Within the polished confines of the grand hall, chandeliers trembled under the weight of 1,000 candles, their flames quivering like the expectant hearts of the assembled nobility. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting the opulence of velvet gowns, satin slippers, and coiffed hair, yet also magnifying the judgmental glances of those whose gossip was sharper than any blade. She stepped from the carriage, a small, deliberate tremor in her gloved hands. The gown she wore was modest, nearly austere, in muted shades of cream that bore no hint of jewel-toned embroidery or satin sheen. Her hair, carefully coiled, lacked the excessive adornments favored by the ladies of high society. Every detail, or lack thereof, made her appear an intruder, a shadow among the brilliance. The whispers began almost immediately. "Who is she, daring to arrive so plainly dressed?" one lady murmured, a mocking smile playing at her lips. "Surely she must have lost her way from some provincial ball," another intoned, voice thick with amusement and subtle scorn. The heroine felt the sting of their words, each syllable slicing through the fragile armor of her dignity. She bowed low, carefully, hoping her humility might cloak her in invisibility, yet the murmur of disapproval only seemed to intensify. The polished floor reflected the flicker of candlelight upon her face, revealing eyes wide with anxiety and a heartbeat too loud to conceal. In that instant, she could almost hear the unspoken verdicts, feel the collective scrutiny pressing upon her shoulders like a tangible weight. Across the room he noticed the Duke, tall, commanding, the kind of man whose presence bent the very air with quiet authority, watched from the opposite side of the ballroom. His dark eyes, thoughtful and piercing, followed her with an intensity that belied the casual mask of aristocratic detachment. He saw not only her modest dress but the subtle grace in her posture, the elegance that whispered beneath her plain exterior. Others saw only a newcomer, a figure unworthy of attention. Yet he saw a spark, a defiance of the world's cruel measures, a dignity untarnished by shame. Society's cruelty did not pause for contemplation. A misstep, her heel caught slightly upon the polished floor, sent a faint ripple of laughter through the room. A glove slipped from her hand, rolled across the floor like a silent plea for mercy. She bent swiftly, cheeks aflame, heart hammering in her chest, but the gaze of every eye seemed to grow heavier, more scrutinizing. Her shame was absolute, yet it was not without a strange, intoxicating vitality, a sense that her mere presence challenged the rigid, cruel hierarchy surrounding her. The Duke, seeing her struggle against the weight of humiliation, rose with quiet decisiveness. He moved through the throng as though the room had parted for him alone, ignoring the curious gazes and faint gasps of the onlookers. There was a measured grace to his approach, a silent assertion that he alone would determine her worth in this crowded hall. She did not yet know that he was coming. She did not yet know that someone, one man, had seen her, truly seen her, in a way that would irrevocably alter the course of her evening. And yet, for a moment, she froze. Not out of fear, but in the surreal awareness that her shame, her longing, and her fragile hope had converged under the indifferent gaze of society and the piercing eyes of a man whose reputation alone could command every whisper in the room. The hall seemed to pause, the candle flames flickering as though in silent anticipation. The first step of his approach echoed with deliberate clarity, a herald of change. Every whispered judgment, every malicious glance, every pang of self-doubt could not diminish the quiet, undeniable truth. She had been seen. And as he closed the distance, the delicate tension of possibility, between humiliation and recognition, shame and desire, hung thickly in the air, promising that nothing in the life she knew would ever remain unchanged. The ballroom continued its elegant din around them, but for that instant, it existed only as a backdrop to a meeting of unspoken understanding, a collision of worlds. And as the Duke drew closer, she could not yet imagine the storm of society's expectations that would follow, nor the way that one glance, one deliberate step across the room, might ignite a sequence of events that would challenge every notion of rank, propriety, and the heart's deepest yearning. Her breath caught, and the crowd, oblivious to the transformation unfolding, continued its polite chatter. She had arrived in shame, but whether she would leave cloaked in scandal or rising in quiet triumph, only the unfolding evening could reveal. A single gesture can ignite whispers that last a lifetime. The Duke reached her side with a quiet authority, his presence commanding without need for declaration. The murmurs of the ballroom seemed to fade, replaced by a subtle shift in the air, as if the chandeliers themselves had paused to witness the small, deliberate moment. He inclined his head in a bow that was neither formal nor distant, but infused with a warmth so unexpected it caused her pulse to flutter beyond her control. In his gloved hand, he held a single violet, a delicate bloom, its petals kissed with dew as if plucked from some hidden garden beneath a morning mist. He extended it toward her, not with the ostentation of a grand gesture meant for display, but with the intimacy of a gift meant solely for her understanding. She hesitated, astonishment mingling with the faintest bloom of hope. "For you," he murmured, voice low, measured, yet brimming with a gravity that made the room feel impossibly vast and impossibly small all at once. It is rare to find one who carries such quiet dignity in a world so determined to ignore it. She accepted the violet, fingers trembling slightly, and in that simple act, a silent acknowledgment passed between them. It was more than admiration, it was recognition, a challenge to the harsh measures of society that had already sought to diminish her. Yet the crowd did not see the intimacy, only the scandal. Eyes widened, whispers sharpened, and the subtle gossip began to thread itself through the hall. "Did you see that? The Duke offering a flower to her? Surely she cannot belong to his station. Who is she that he would deign to honor her so?" The room had become a stage for quiet rebellion. The heroine, feeling both the thrill and the terror of being singled out, clutched the violet to her chest. It was a token, yes, but also a spark, an ignition of possibilities that had never before dared stir within her. She was painfully aware of the eyes that measured her every reaction, of the whispers that hung between the chandeliers like poisoned perfume. The Duke, unflinching, allowed no acknowledgement of the scandalous attention surrounding them. He extended his arm with gentle insistence. "Shall we?" he asked, an invitation to dance that carried an unspoken promise of both protection and challenge. She hesitated, heart thrumming with a mixture of apprehension and exhilaration, aware that a single misstep could undo this fragile connection. Yet something within her stirred, a courage born not of pride, but of recognition that she was no longer invisible. As they moved to the floor, their bodies carefully aligned in the strict choreography of the waltz, whispers surged through the crowd like a rising tide. A rival noble, sensing opportunity, leaned close to a companion and murmured a biting remark intended to wound. A girl from nowhere, daring to claim the Duke's attention. She will bring ruin or worse, scandal. The heroine's cheeks flushed with a heat that was equal parts embarrassment and an unfamiliar sense of power. Each step on the polished floor mirrored the delicate tension between shame and recognition, every turn and lift of the hands a silent negotiation with both desire and decorum. She felt the Duke's gaze anchored upon her, a tether in the storm of gossip and judgment that threatened to sweep her away. When their eyes met across the ballroom, the violet resting gently at her wrist like a talisman, the unspoken message was clear. She had been seen, truly seen, and in that recognition lay both peril and possibility. The scandal of the room was merely a backdrop to the burgeoning understanding between them, a subtle, electric charge that neither could name aloud but both understood fully. Yet society was relentless. A footman's whispered warning, a familiar socialite's disapproving glance, even the subtle tightening of a neighbor's grip upon her fan reminded her that the world was watching, poised to judge every gesture. The violet, delicate and fragrant, felt heavier now, laden not only with beauty but with expectation. She could sense that her actions, her reactions, would ripple far beyond this single evening, and that the Duke's favor had placed her squarely in the line of society's scrutinizing gaze. As the music swelled, carrying them through the ballroom in a series of precise, flowing steps, she realized that the evening had changed irrevocably. The token he had offered was more than a flower, it was a declaration in miniature, a challenge to every whisper and every judgment. She held it close, trembling not with fear alone, but with the dangerous, intoxicating thrill of being noticed, of being chosen, of standing at the threshold of a world she had never dared enter. And then, as the waltz reached its crescendo, a sharp voice cut through the music. A rival, a scornful whisper aimed to wound, to test the fragile thread of her newfound presence. How long before she falls, exposed for all to see? Her eyes met the Duke's once more, and in that steady, unwavering gaze she found the courage to lift her chin, to claim the moment as her own. The ballroom could whisper. The world could judge. But for now, she was no longer merely a shadow in the glittering hall. She was seen. She was chosen. And the scandal that threatened her might, in time, become her finest triumph. "I see more in you than you dare believe." The evening had deepened into a velvet hush, the ballroom's brilliance receding behind the drawn curtains and flickering candlelight. Outside, the rain had slowed to a gentle mist, softening the cobblestones and painting the city in silver. He led her away from the crowded hall, down a narrow corridor whose portraits of solemn ancestors watched with silent judgment. The echo of their footsteps was the only sound, a quiet metronome marking the unspoken tension between them. At last they arrived upon a small, secluded gallery, where the windows framed the blurred lights of carriages passing through slick streets. He gestured toward a marble bench beneath a painting of a storm-tossed sea, its churning waves a silent reflection of the turbulence she felt within. She sat, hands folded tightly in her lap, heart still hammering from the dance, from the weight of eyes and whispers that lingered even in their absence. He stood before her, tall and unwavering, the faintest shadow of a smile touching the corner of his lips. His eyes, dark and assessing, held a depth that seemed to read the truths she herself had not dared to speak. The violet, still clutched at her wrist, reminded her of the delicate thread connecting them, a thread she feared might fray with the slightest misstep. "You carry a strength beneath your modesty," he began, voice low, measured, yet rich with emotion. "And yet I sense the world has sought to diminish it. You shrink not because you are less, but because you fear they will not see the truth." Her breath caught. She had spent a lifetime cloaked in restraint, in careful observance of what was expected, what was deemed proper. To hear her essence recognized, without pretense, without judgment, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her voice trembled as she spoke, confessing fears she had never dared voice aloud. I'm not like them. I have no wealth, no lineage to commend me. And yet here I am, exposed to every eye, every whisper, and I cannot hide." He knelt before her, lowering himself not in submission but in quiet reverence. "You are not exposed, you are revealed. And in that revelation, you hold more power than those who parade their riches and titles could ever comprehend." His hand, gloved yet warm, hovered near hers, not touching but offering the promise of safety and understanding. The intimacy of the moment was interrupted by a faint, sudden noise, a servant passing through a distant doorway, the soft rustle of silk. Both flinched, their awareness of propriety snapping sharply back. She drew her hands to her chest, cheeks aflame with the risk of their closeness, yet something in her dared to lean toward the vulnerability he had elicited. "You see me," she whispered almost to herself, "truly see me though I am so unworthy of notice." He smiled then, a slow, certain curve of lips that held no arrogance, only recognition. "I see more than notice, more than admiration. I see the heart that has endured and yet refuses to bend. I see the courage beneath the fear, the dignity beneath the whispers, the spirit beneath the silence." A tremor of emotion passed through her, a mixture of awe, relief, and an intoxicating hope she had not believed possible. The world of rigid etiquette, of cruel expectations, seemed to recede, leaving only the fragile bridge between them, delicate, treacherous, yet luminous with potential. But even as the confessions hung between them, a shadow of reality intruded, the distant echo of voices from the ballroom, the faint click of a door opening too near. The threat of discovery, of scandal, was never far, and the tension between desire and propriety coiled tighter around them. He took a measured step closer, lowering his voice to a murmur that only she could hear. "Let no one, not society nor circumstance, convince you that you are anything less than extraordinary. Not tonight, not ever." She looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity, the intensity, the unspoken challenge that he placed before her. It was no longer merely a token or a gesture. They were sharing a fragile truth, an acknowledgement that their hearts had begun to speak where words had failed, that the confines of propriety were no match for the weight of feeling between them. And as the distant music of the ballroom floated through the corridor, a storm of unspoken possibilities gathered around them. The private confession was complete, yet incomplete, an invitation to courage, a promise of challenge, and a quiet dare to confront the world together, heart by heart, against the tide of expectation. "I will not let the world dictate what my heart has chosen." The ballroom shimmered under 1,000 candles, chandeliers casting fractured light across faces both eager and judgmental. Music swelled, a lilting waltz that carried the weight of expectation, yet within its rhythm lay a pulse of daring defiance. She entered once more, heart steadied but nerves aflame, her modest gown now touched with the quiet confidence that only acknowledgement of one's own worth can bring. Every whisper, every glance, sought to measure her against impossibly cruel standards, but tonight she no longer flinched. Across the room, he waited, tall and unwavering, as if the polished marble floor itself had bent to frame him. The Duke's eyes found hers immediately, dark orbs alight with unspoken intent, challenging both the crowd and her to recognize what had long been invisible. In that instant, the chatter faded into insignificance. The scrutiny of society became irrelevant. This was a declaration beyond words, a summons for courage, for acknowledgement, for choice. He advanced toward her, each measured step drawing a ripple of fascination from the onlookers, yet he seemed unaware of the attention. His voice, low yet resonant, reached her across the polished hall. There is no need for whispers, no need for approval. I have seen what truly matters. The tension tightened, a taut cord between propriety and desire. She felt every eye, every judgment, yet it was as though a shield had been raised around her by the sheer force of his presence. The rival nobles who had whispered behind fans and pressed gossip into eager ears now watched, some with incredulity, others with begrudging admiration. The scandal they had hoped to ignite was eclipsed by something far more potent, bold assertion and undeniable truth. He stopped before her, extending his hand with that same quiet insistence that had first bridged the gulf between their worlds. "Dance with me," he said, a command softened only by the gentleness in his eyes. "Let them watch. Let them whisper. Tonight, I claim what the world may not understand." She placed her hand in his, feeling the strength beneath his control, the warmth that steadied her resolve. The music drew them across the ballroom in perfect rhythm, but this was no ordinary waltz. It was a statement. Each turn, each lift, each delicate step was a protest against judgment, a celebration of courage, a quiet rebellion in a world ruled by expectation. As the dance carried them past every whispering onlooker, the Duke spoke again, words measured, deliberate, and irrevocable. "I choose you. Not for appearances, not for approval, but because you are seen, truly seen. And I will not let society decide what I hold most precious." The declaration struck like a bell, reverberating through the hall. The heroine's chest swelled with a mixture of relief, awe, and triumph. She felt the weight of shame lift, replaced by an exhilaration she had scarcely imagined possible. Every glance that had sought to diminish her was now transformed into a testament of her courage. Her dignity, once fragile, now shone in quiet defiance, mirrored in the unwavering gaze of the man before her. Society murmured, some with shock, some with grudging respect, yet their opinions could no longer touch the bond that had been forged. She raised her chin, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that matched his own. In that shared glance, the ballroom, the gossip, the hierarchy, all became mere scenery. What remained was undeniable: recognition, desire, and the irrevocable choice to defy expectation together. And as the music drew to a final soaring note, the heroine and the Duke stood, hand in hand, at the center of a hall that had sought to judge them. Yet judgment held no sway. In its place was something far more powerful: love acknowledged, courage embraced, and the quiet, radiant triumph of two hearts choosing each other in defiance of the world. The waltz ended, but the echo lingered, not in the candles, not in the polished floors, but in the moment they had claimed. A climax of heart and spirit, thrilling, resolute, and utterly irreversible. Some hearts are worth defying the world for. The night had settled into a hushed expectation, the grandeur of the ballroom now softened by the fading candlelight and the distant murmurs of carriages departing into the slick, rain-dappled streets. Yet within its walls, tension coiled like a living thing, poised to erupt. She stood at the center of the hall, hand clasped firmly within his, feeling the lingering weight of every judgmental gaze that had once sought to diminish her. Every whisper, every sneer, every expectation now hung suspended, powerless against the quiet storm of conviction and courage that had grown between them. A rival noble, pale with indignation and eyes aflame with envy, stepped forward with a sharp remark intended to wound, to provoke. "Surely you cannot intend to." The Duke's gaze cut through the room with an authority that silenced even the bravest dissent. "I intend nothing more than to honor what is true," he said, voice low but carrying effortlessly across the hall. "My choice is not yours to question, nor society's to dictate." Her chest rose with relief and triumph, yet it was not victory alone that filled her heart. It was the thrill of agency, the recognition that she had, at last, stepped fully into her own worth. No more would she shrink beneath the weight of whispered judgments or faltering expectation. In the heat of the confrontation, she lifted her chin, eyes meeting those of the Duke, a spark of defiance mirrored in their depths. "Let them judge," she murmured, barely audible, "for I have chosen my own path." The hall seemed to exhale, the music swelling once more as if in celebration of the courage they had claimed together. Each step they took was a defiance of convention. Each glance, a quiet assertion of the bond that had been forged in the shadows, in stolen moments, and through whispered confessions. They moved not merely in dance, but in harmony of conviction and desire, a union both fragile and unassailable. The rival faltered, recognizing that no scandal, no whisper, could dismantle what had been so deliberately, so irrevocably affirmed. Society, ever watchful, could only murmur and gape, its influence rendered impotent by the sheer force of authenticity and courage displayed before it. She felt the Duke's hand tighten gently around hers, grounding her, lending her the unspoken strength to remain steadfast. And in that decisive instant, all tension snapped into resolution. Their eyes met, hers bright with awe, him steady with unwavering devotion, and the room with its gilded walls and glimmering chandeliers dissolved into irrelevance. Nothing mattered but the quiet, unyielding truth of two hearts having found one another, a truth no hierarchy, no gossip, no expectation could unseat. He bent slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face with the gentlest of touches, a gesture more intimate than words could capture. "Whatever storms may come," he whispered, "we will face them together." She nodded, feeling the final release of fear, of doubt, of hesitation that had bound her spirit for so long. The violet he had first offered rested once more at her wrist, its delicate petals a symbol of beginnings, of recognition, and of triumph over every shadowed glance that had ever sought to define her. As the last notes of music faded, a hush fell across the room. Yet it was not silence born of judgment, but of awe, the undeniable recognition of a union forged by courage, choice, and love. The heroine, once burdened by shame and expectation, now stood radiant in her dignity, beside a man whose devotion had been proven by action and heart alike. The candles flickered, casting their golden glow across the hall, illuminating the quiet triumph etched upon their faces. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving the world glistening and renewed. Within, a story of courage, love, and defiance had reached its irrevocable conclusion. Hearts had been chosen, dignity reclaimed, and a bond declared that no whisper, no expectation, no society could undo. And so, hand in hand, they faced the world, not as shadows to be judged, but as a testament to the power of choice, recognition, and love earned through courage, patience, and the unyielding refusal to be diminished. In that final luminous moment, the scandal faded, the whispers ceased, and only the truth remained. Two hearts, resolute and intertwined, had claimed their place in defiance of the world, and in doing so had become untouchable.